Welcome to the webinar this morning on Ethiopia. My name is Marcus Borley and I'm the project manager for the Local Resources Network. We're going to be hearing today from Pauline Osler, who is the director of WageIndicator. Pauline will be running us through some of the issues around wages, wage payments, collective bargaining agreements and so on. As a way of providing some context around this particular issue. And then we'll also hear from Lauren Shields, who is the manager of the HER project. And Lauren will be telling us a little bit about then the work they've been doing in the horticulture sector in Ethiopia. And also some information there around their plans in the textile sector in Ethiopia. For those of you who are relatively new to the Local Resources Network, I just thought I'd give a sort of brief explanation of what the Local Resources Network is, and then I'll give you sort of a little bit of background information around Ethiopia, which will be based on the report we wrote last year, and then I'll hand over to Pauline first, and then we'll hand over to Lauren, and we'll finish off with some questions at the end of the webinar. So I've allocated about 15 minutes at the end of this session, then the end of this hour, just for questions and some discussion around some of the things we hear from Pauline and Lauren. The Local Resource Network is then it's an online network. The Local Resources Network came about in 2007 when ETI members discovered that they needed an easy way to find local partners to help them implement supply chain improvements. So the idea was simple. It's how can we engage with relevant experts on the ground? And as is often the case, an Excel file was born. This was passed around from ETI member to ETI member, who completed with sort of some of the local experts that they'd used. And it grew and grew until someone came up with a great idea of putting it online. So after almost 10 years of existence, the last year in particular, we've had a huge drive to building the network, both in Ethiopia but also other East African countries and globally. We have about 250 members at the moment. A large proportion of those are in some of the sort of the key production markets, for example, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, China. And what we can see obviously is that East Africa, there's quite a sort of a small number, around 30 at the moment, and we're looking to build up that network. So I'm hoping this for them will also be a drive to those of you who are maybe considering membership to reach out to your networks and to ask people to come and join the Local Resources Network. The Local Resources Network, excuse me, basically provides value through three main areas. First of all, we have connections, which is basically connecting people through our global network, both online, but also through some of the local events that we ran. So last year we ran an event in Kenya. This year we ran an event in Pakistan, and we're looking for a sort of a location for next year at the moment. The main sort of thrust activity though is trying to get people to connect online, bringing people into the database so that buying companies, suppliers and other stakeholders can search for and find the local expertise they need on the ground. And that's kind of the main idea there, is just to foster some kind of collaboration through a multi-stakeholder approach. We are a project that is a joint initiative between the Ethical Trading Initiative in the UK, Norway and Denmark, and therefore sort of embrace that multi-stakeholder approach, which is so core to the Ethical Trading Initiative's the principle of ethical trade. And then finally, providing some kind of insight, some kind of local knowledge, expertise, primarily through what we call then our country briefings, which is country risk intelligence, but also some through experience exchange. And today, the webinar today is a great example of that, looking at some of the things that are happening on the ground, bringing local experts or people who have expertise for a particular production country, bringing them in and asking them to share their knowledge. And as I said, we're very lucky to have both Pauline and Lauren helping us to understand Ethiopia, the production in Ethiopia better today. Part of the insight, part of our country risk intelligence, as I said, we produced a report on Ethiopia last year, and what became sort of evident through this, I mean, our approach to these reports is always just to search through publicly available information and to sort of synthesize this in an easily digestible manner. There's a wealth of information out there, and for a lot of the countries who are trying to perform some kind of human rights due diligence, it can be quite difficult to access that information and to try and make sense of it. So that's basically the task that we took on board, was to try to provide concise and accurate information. So what we found out was that, of course, that with the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia has experienced incredible growth over the last 10 years, double-digit growth over the last 10 years. Agriculture is a critical industry for the Ethiopian economy, and accounts for approximately 40% of GDP in total. This is primarily coffee, which alone accounts for 10% of Ethiopia's GDP. But what we can also see from the agricultural industry is that it accounts for approximately 75% of employment. There are, of course, some issues there that need to be addressed, not least child labour. We can see that of the 5 million children engaged in child labour in Ethiopia, a large proportion of those are working in the agricultural industry. And we can see also that the government's plans are to actually double agricultural productivity over the next few years as it moves then towards a middle-income country by 2025. This is one of the Ethiopian government's plans for the country. As part of this growth and as an expansion plan, we can see that there's a sort of broad-based set of goals to then reduce poverty, to invest in infrastructure, as I mentioned, a doubling of agricultural productivity, and also growth of key industrial sectors. And this is perhaps where we also see that that growth is already taking over agriculture, and that's in some of the service and manufacturing industries, not least the sugar industry, textiles, leather, and cement as a key growth sectors for Ethiopia. And as I mentioned initially, there's no surprise there that Lauren is going to tell us a little bit then about what their plans are to work in the textile industry this morning. So as sort of Ethiopia is poised to develop a manufacturing sector that's capable of competing on a global scale, this is great news for investment. Great news when we see an increasing amount of interest from buying companies looking to Ethiopia. But of course, this comes at a I'm not going to say it comes at a cost, but it's important then to have also some of the labour rights and human rights perspective when investing in sub-Saharan Africa. Ethiopia has ratified the 8 ILO core conventions, and you can see that the Ethiopian government works closely with the ILO. The Decent Work Country Programme there focuses on strengthening the legal framework, including the implementation of relevant conventions, improved governance. Ethiopia scores quite low when it comes to corruption, for example. And also then improving the framework for social dialogue, improving access to employment, especially for women, but also for youth workers, migrant workers, and disabled workers. So I think that's kind of a little bit of background. These are kind of sort of some of the things that we found out when we made our report last year. Ethiopia is one of the most populous countries in sub-Saharan Africa, with roughly 100 million people. It's also one of the world's oldest civilizations. It's also perhaps one of the world's poorest, with an estimated 40% of people living below the poverty line, the international poverty line of $1.25 a day. So it's an exciting, I think it's an exciting place for a lot of buying companies to be looking at now, to be investing in. Obviously, the current state of emergency is a concern. The 6-month state of emergency that was imposed then in earlier this year. Certain companies have seemed to suggest that this has not had the huge impact on investment that was expected, but obviously there are certain restrictions and warnings and so on around travelling to Ethiopia, which is I think had an impact certainly in certain industries and for certain people. Maybe we'll hear a little bit more about that later. What I'd like to do now is to hand over to Pauline. So if you can just give us a couple of seconds while I make Pauline a presenter and ask her then to connect with her presentation. And then after Pauline, we'll hear a little bit from Lauren, and then we'll open up for discussion. Okay. Okay, Pauline, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, perfect, good. And then we can hear you as well. I'm making you a presenter. You should get a little message which you click on, and then you basically have control of the screen and you can share your presentation with us.
Can you see it?
I can see it, so I assume that everybody else can see it too.
Okay, hold on, I have to broaden it. Yes. Okay, welcome to everybody. I hope one of you have been in Ethiopia. I've been in Ethiopia quite recent and spoke with partners in Ethiopia with whom we work, and they're from SETO. SETO is one of the largest trade unions in Ethiopia. Trade union landscape in Ethiopia is a bit different from Kenya, for instance, or Egypt, or whatever, the Netherlands or Norway. It's a bit, let's say, the old-fashioned communist way. One trade union, very strong, but very political linked as well. So that's how SETO's our partner. At the same time, SETO told us that it's very difficult at the moment to move around in the country. So most of their activities at the moment are in Addis, and so that's a bit of a background. We work in Ethiopia. We, as WageIndicator Foundation, work in Ethiopia since 4 years, 2011, 2012. We started with data collection on wages and working conditions, and after on cost of living data. And obviously we have information on labor law and a hell of a lot about collective agreements. I will talk you through quickly through a bit of WageIndicator, very, very quick. It's WageIndicator's 92 countries. We focus on salary, career, and labor law, collective agreements as well. In all countries we have people from trade unions, employers organizations, universities, or journalists. We're keen on transparency everywhere, which means people can test labor law, check their salary, but also companies can see whether they comply with the labor law, and this is done on a large scale. Good. You all can follow, I assume?
It's looking good from where I'm sitting, Pauline. So I'm
okay,
assuming everyone else can see as well.
Okay, then very quick, our infrastructure. We within 92 countries we have websites. all over the place, and in each website we have it in national language and in English. Roughly websites at the moment reach out to 38 million people in the world, and it's between 30 and 60% is mobile, reached out in mobile. In Ethiopia, for instance, 60%. Target group, first place, it's workers, small employers, but next to that, social partners, governments, and we team up a lot with the LRN OECD. And since we are mainly academics, we cater a lot for the academic world as well. We like to be transparent because we realize that if the, let's say, smallest unit, a family or a small company can't take informed decisions, what do you do on government level or on global level? So even the smallest unit needs to have facts to come to informed decisions. And facts can be minimum wage, living wage, collective agreements, real wages. Well, we do that with teams around the world. Enough about infrastructure. There is in the end of my presentations more on infrastructure. Now we go to Ethiopia. I focus a bit on minimum wage because it's well, it's an issue we have been working a lot on with SETO, the trade union there, but also because it's quite crucial to get a more decent labor market, especially for women. And since a lot of horticulture is focused on women, so why not focusing on minimum wages? There is a minimum wage structure in Ethiopia, mainly for agriculture. The government is taking care of that. Trade unions and employers have hardly any say, but they really like it. And so far they were not able to improve or to broaden the minimum wage to other sectors in Ethiopia. This is a bit of a problem. If you look at our wages in context in Ethiopia, then you can see on the basis well, of a normal family size in Ethiopia, you can see that the World Bank poverty line is 442 birr, which is really nothing, and the national the national poverty line is even smaller, which means that the Ethiopian government doesn't take the national poverty line serious, and this is the same for the minimum wage, because the lowest minimum wage we found is 420 birr per month. And as long as you don't know what is a birr, that's not a problem, but as soon as you see that the living wage for a family in Ethiopia for a larger city, so not for Addis, but for, let's say, for a medium-sized city, it's 3,000, let's say 3,176 birr needed per month, then you realize that minimum wage is problematic, really problematic to change and to improve systems. Without any proper minimum wage setting, any other level becomes a bit of a problem. And okay, that is, so here is the, let's say, the low minimum wage only for agriculture is an issue. Another issue for Ethiopia, but that's not so new for many other countries in the world, but is that there are extremely long working hours. So we, in our research we did, we found out that, let's say, top professionals in offices, obviously they come to roughly 40 hours a week or even less, 38. But a lot of people come to 47, 48 hours a week, which is a lot, especially a lot when standard hours is 40, but there are many who report up to 60 or even above 60 hours a week. And well, when you work yourself, you realize that 60 hours a week is just too much. It means that you can't recover, and that's a problem. Okay, so remember the living wage of 3,176. Now we go to real wages, and within our wages in context structure, we show the whole range. Let's say from World Bank poverty up to high-skilled wages. And high-skilled wages, obviously, they should be higher than a minimum wage, and they should be higher than the living wage, for sure. What you see now is that the low-skilled wages, which we found, are very close, a bit higher than the living wage. It's an extra argument to improve at least the minimum wage structure. It can't be such a drama as well, because most of the people get already more than the lowest minimum wage of 420 in Ethiopia. So that's minimum wages. There is many more on minimum wages on our website, mywage.org/Ethiopia. There is many more. Message is a problem with minimum wage setting. Okay, and real wages are not that, well, they're low, but they're not that low. There is a structure. I would like to share with you a small table on the basis of the research which we did in 2013 throughout Ethiopia. And on this basis of this graph, you can see, well, some issues are obvious. What you can see is that the salaries are higher when the company is higher. When the company is very small, salaries are low or too low, which is quite common around the globe, but it's also this also counts for Ethiopia. What you see is that there is a lot of informality. The more informal the job is, the lower the pay is. This is maybe nothing new, but you see in our situation, you see it quite clear, and you see that women are more affected by it than men. Especially, so this counts for informality, but it also counts for people who have no contract. Having no contract, but work somewhere, then you're the most vulnerable of all. That's different from being self-employed and at least have a kind of a company. Okay, well, it's clear that managers earn more and work less. It's clear that low education gives you the lowest income, and that is really low. But you also see that, for instance, in skilled agriculture, salaries are still, well, reasonable, I would say. Not perfect, but reasonable. Okay, this is about salaries. Again and again, the problem is in the minimum wage. Okay, then collective agreements. There are collective agreements in Ethiopia, and it's a reasonable structure done by trade unions and employers. At this moment, we have 54 collective agreements in the system, and many which are still in the row to wait. What we can see in the collective agreements is well, that they are I think the best thing to say is there are a couple of weak points in the collective agreements. So any one of you who's focusing on improving collective agreements, as long as there is no minimum wage structure or proper one, then the first focus should be have wage tables in the collective agreements, refer to a proper minimum wage. That doesn't have to be the legal minimum wage, it can be higher. It can be the living wage as we presented it. But no wage means it allows employers to say, well, people without any contract will get very low pay. Next to that, in the collective agreement, is quite crucial to state that if there are increases in wages, that they should be mentioned within the contract. Not in the contract means that nobody knows and it will not happen. If in cases, let's say in sectors where people work a lot on Saturday, Sunday, in the night, it needs well, it's good to focus on premiums, on extra percentages or extra higher wages in these sectors. I made a whole list of all collective agreements which we have. There's a lot in textile, agriculture, or in horticulture as well. So check it yourself if you want, or come back to us if you want to know more of it. This is all real, so we didn't made up these collective agreements, they are real. Something cool maybe what we do with collective agreements, as soon as we have quite a lot, together with workers' employers in a country, in this case with SETU, we create a so-called sample CBA. That sample collective agreement is the best of all, which can be used for negotiations. What we know now is that this sample CBA, which we have online on mywage.org, is already used in 120 companies at the moment. So it really helps to improve improve workers' conditions, especially when you say, well, let's focus in a collective agreement on proper pay scales, on a reasonable set, a lowest wage, etc., which is better than well, than nothing. Okay. If somebody thinks that it's dramatic in Ethiopia and that everybody's unhappy, it's not true. What you see from our research, that quite a lot of people are reasonably happy. Women are more happy than men. Elderly are more happy than younger ones. Well, elderly sometimes are better off as well. Higher educated are more happy than lower educated. People without any contract, and they are less satisfied, which means that in any step you take, focusing on companies, make sure that you bring people in, including a contract, including a minimum wage. That will make people more happy, and it's in the end good for the society, or good for the economy as well. I think that's it. The other slides I have are more on our infrastructure, on links which we can share with you, to the salary indicator in Ethiopia, to the labor law in Ethiopia. This is all up to date until now. Minimum wage structure and publication on wages. That's it.
That was fantastic, Pauline. Thank you very much. Very interesting, and some key points there, particularly around sort of, as you said, about minimum wage setting, tips on around ensuring that people have contracts, and also great reference to links that people can actually go and follow up and use in their supply chain. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
I think I'd like just to, because this is such a very different presentation from the next, I think it might be good just to take a couple of minutes and to answer a couple of questions. So I'm going to open up now, just about 2-3 minutes. There will be more time to answer questions later, but just 2-3 minutes now. Are there any immediate questions from the listeners? Please send it into the question if you write it into the question pane. Okay, yeah, a simple question there about, can you share the presentation slides? Yes, we'll be sharing the presentation slides at the end.
Yes, that's okay.
Yeah, another question, did you do any check for service continuity? Does that mean anything to you, Pauline? I'm not quite sure what that means.
What is service continuity?
Good question.
That's
a question from Moon. Moon, could you add something more there so we can understand a bit more about what you're referring to? Contracts back to back. Okay, I see what you mean. So as instead of just offering short-term contracts, whether they're offering sort of contract after contract after contract, and does that have any impact? Are we talking? Yeah, has that been an issue, or is that something that you've looked at all, Pauline?
No, we checked. What we know is that you, well, in the wage report, which is one of the links, we know that some people have just proper contracts. That's if for let's say, you can say forever contracts under a proper collective agreement. It exists in Ethiopia. That's what I can say. Obviously, when people have such a contract, they're more happy.
Yeah.
Is that, well, it's logic, but since a lot of informal work is still going on in Ethiopia, to have a perfect contract doesn't exist, doesn't happen all the time.
No, no, sure.
No, yes.
Okay.
So yes, we record it. We follow it, of course.
Okay, interesting. Good. I just have one question, I think, before we move on, and that was around the issues you mentioned with minimum wage setting. Now, you've shown us this data, which has basically said that although the minimum wage is very low compared to a living wage, what actually appears to be happening in reality is that people are paid much more than, or at least more or less on par with the living wage, even sort of low-skilled workers. What's the trade unions' attitudes towards this? I mean, you've showed us now all these collective bargaining agreements where there is the possibility to set a wage limit, which is sort of reflective of a living wage. What sort of? I'd be so interested to know. So, what comes out of your conversations with trade unions around this? What's their attitude towards it?
Okay, first of all, as long as there is not a proper minimum wage, then we still, and we found that in our research as well, then you still have people without any contract, without any proper link to a company. And they sometimes are paid, especially women, paid very, very low. So in that sense, it's not that everybody, including the low-skilled workers, are close to a living wage. So it's not all perfect in that sense. That's one. The second one, I've been doing these discussions myself with SETU for 4 years, and that's because we have a set of countries in our teams with minimum wage structure problems. And that Ethiopia is one of it, and Rwanda was one of it, Uganda and Burundi was one of it. And all the other countries are going fine. There is at least a lot of progress in that sense. In Ethiopia, not. It's there already. This situation is already there for a couple of years. They say we want it, trade unions, employers say no, it's not good for business to have it, and they have the feeling that they can't change the government in this sense. Full stop. And are they strong enough? SETU is strong enough to have at least a big bunch of collective agreements, and to be honest, not all trade unions in the world can show that. So they're not super weak. And yes, I mean, at least they can do something. So they need to be respected from that point of view compared to many other trade unions, I would say. But still, they're not able to fix this, which means that any outsider who's coming, I think, should emphasize that you can do this in your own collective agreement for your own company where you're doing your own investment, but it's only helping these people in that company and no one else in the area. So it's in the end, it's not wise. Full stop.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Yeah, good points there. Okay, there'll be more chance to ask Pauline some questions in about 20 minutes, but I'd like to hand over now to Lauren from the HER project. Okay, so I'm going to take you away from being presented, Pauline, and hand that over now to Lauren. If you just wait 1 second. Okay. Okay, Lauren, let's have a look. Sorry, you're still muted. Give me 1 second. What's going on here? Oh, Lauren's disappeared. No, obviously not. Hang on 1 second, Lauren. I can't, at the moment you're muted. I can't find you in the list. Very strange.
Oh, I think, am I on?
Yeah, there we go. We can hear you. Perfect. All right, excellent. Okay, good. Lauren, thank you. Welcome, and I'll just hand over straight over to you, and off you go. Tell us a little bit about the HER project in Ethiopia.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks very much, Marcus, for the opportunity to speak today. Thanks, Pauline, as well. I think your introduction was really great, and some of the relevant points around how women are disproportionately affected by wages and informality of contracts, that will certainly come through in my presentation as well. Great. Okay. So just in terms of some of the points I'll cover in the next 15 to 20 minutes, I want to give you a quick overview of what her project is for those who don't know us, speak a bit about our work in Ethiopia to date, specifically with the horticulture sector, and looking forward to the apparel sector. In terms of my role, as Marcus mentioned, I'm a manager at her project, and I oversee our work in East Africa in particular. Okay, I guess I'll do it this way because you'll have to see the slides on both sides. Sorry about that. Okay, so a bit about her project just to begin. Our mission is to unlock the full potential of women working in global supply chains. So we deliver workplace-based programs promoting health, financial inclusion, and gender equality. Here you see our three main pillars, looking at those main topics, and really focusing on women's empowerment in global supply chains. In terms of how we work, we're a collaborative initiative with a number of buying companies, brands, working with their suppliers. We also work with local implementing partners who are delivering workplace programs focused on women's empowerment in factories and farms in the countries where we work. In terms of her project in numbers, we're active in 14 countries right now, have reached about 500,000 women directly, and working in about 420 factories and farms at the moment. This is to give you a sense of some of our company partners. So we work with these companies and with their suppliers in supply chains to deliver these programs. And I know that there's some overlap with the LRN family, so we're all part of the same family here. Okay, so turning now to her project's work in Ethiopia and specifically our partnership with AFEA. So this project is called Empowering the Source. It's a project that we began actually in 2014, and implementation began really in full in 2015, working with the Ethiopian Horticulture Producer Exporter Association, quite a mouthful, but it's the leading business membership association in the horticulture sector in Ethiopia. They really focus on promoting the sector internationally in international markets. Of course, young women are really dominating that workforce in Ethiopia. They represent 80 to 85% of the employees. And so the partnership really began when AFEA recognized that there are unique challenges that women workers in the sector are facing. And they decided to partner with BSR and her project to set up a gender department specifically to meet the needs of women workers, to provide support and capacity building with their farm members, as well as to engage in some advocacy and awareness raising work with governments, NGOs, and other stakeholders. So to take one step back in terms of the context that we saw starting this project in horticulture and floriculture, what are kind of the key highlights for women workers? Of course, on one hand, employment in the sector provides an opportunity for women to advance their livelihoods, to gain a salary. We heard from Pauline that some of the salaried work is relatively good in Ethiopia. However, this is a group of workers that is vulnerable to specific risks. Some are coming from quite low education backgrounds. They're relatively young, about 18 to 25 typically. They're single. There are also some dynamics around these being rural areas and some women moving for work. So as we conducted a baseline with AFEA, this baseline really highlighted low levels of knowledge and awareness, particularly on some key health issues within the worker population. We also saw a need to work directly with farm management and find ways to boost the systems and understanding of management to support women better. So that's a bit of the context. In terms of what we did, the approach that we took with IFEA, so again, with IFEA we set up a gender department. This is a team of 3 that's within IFEA itself, which is providing these services to members as part of their membership fee structure. So 3 major work streams that we implemented with IFEA member farms. First was looking at health training, so providing health trainings to farm workers as well as nurses in some of the farms where there was a nurse. A second was looking at gender-sensitive management. This is an intervention focused on farm management rather than workers, well, in addition to workers. So looking to set up gender policies and as well as gender committees. And finally, looking at harassment in the workplace. So this is an issue in many sectors where we work, but there was really a need to look at workplace policies and procedures to prevent and respond to sexual harassment. And just to say that these were the 3 work streams that we began with that IFEA really identified as starting points to make improvements in the industry to make work better for women. So that was kind of the rationale for starting here, but just also to highlight that we were looking throughout the course of implementation to link this work with the business case for this. We really see, and IFEA really sees the need to invest in these changes for the long-term growth of the sector. Okay, a bit about results from the first phase. So this is through kind of early 2016. So we were looking at what were the changes in terms of knowledge and behavior of women workers who were targeted in the intervention. So we see an increase in the awareness about rights regarding protection from sexual harassment and information about some of these really key health issues such as hygiene, nutrition, family planning, and reproductive health. In terms of changes that we saw within the farms themselves, we saw about half of the pilot project farms developed and started implementing a gender policy. And we saw about 2/3 of the farms either activating or setting up gender committees and having more effective reporting systems. And then on the side there you see some of the outputs. So again, the IFEA membership is about 110 farms, so we had a little less than a quarter of those participating in the program in the first year. Peer educators were trained directly by IFEA, and those peer educators then provide outreach to 7,000 workers. And you see the numbers on kind of other HR representatives and gender committees that participate in the program. A bit now about lessons learned from this, from our first kind of pilot phase with IFEA. So ultimately we see this as quite successful. I think the first point to make here is that IFEA is really showing leadership by making women's empowerment a priority for them and for helping to mobilize their entire membership to take action on these issues. So that's really exciting to see, and that we could have really promising results in the first phase is quite promising. So in terms of what we're looking to do better kind of going forward, so the second phase of empowering the source is starting basically this quarter and early next year. A few things we want to strengthen in terms of the implementation model. One is spending additional time with farm managers. I think for many on the call, understanding the importance of really changing mindsets about the importance of these social issues and some of the suppliers that that you work with, that we see that as really essential. So in the second phase, we're looking to allocate more time for that type of engagement, set up kind of the formal channels like gender committees, training schedules, commitments early on in the process. And also further on in the process, seek opportunities to recognize those suppliers that are really taking on the activities and being successful. A second piece here is really around the need for a longer-term intervention. With her project, we're working in 14 countries and certainly recognize that for some of these topics, it takes some time to see actual behavioral change. So it's one thing to participate in a training around hygiene, but to actually take those practices home and change behavior takes some time. So this is not surprising to us, but just something we want to focus on more in the second phase. So offering additional refresher training, continuing this dual approach of working both with workers as well as workplace management, which we see as essential to having an empowering workplace in a holistic sense. So just in terms of looking ahead towards what we'll be doing with the FAE over the next 3 years, we're looking to increase the program, working with about 42 farms, so getting to about half of the FAE membership, which is about half of the exporting horticulture farms in Ethiopia, and reaching about 20,000 workers. So that's a bit about our work in horticulture. In the last few minutes here, I'm going to turn to discuss the textile and apparel sector, which is a new sector for us where we're looking to expand in the next few months. Okay, so a few updates to share on the call here. So the first is that over the course of the past few months, we've been conducting a kind of quick and dirty scoping study to understand the current players and initiatives in the industry, as well as the challenges and opportunities faced by female workers. We heard a bit from Marcus about kind of how Ethiopia as a whole is developing, the kind of rapid growth that we see there. This is something that certainly came out in our research as well. We see apparel as a really dynamic space. I mean, one number is that export earnings have increased over the past 5 years from $60 million to $160, so more than tripled. In addition to it being a pretty dynamic space, I would also call out that we see from a number of players active in apparel an interest in establishing good practices really from the beginning of the sector, kind of learning lessons from other countries like Bangladesh, where of course the Rana Plaza disaster has kind of colored the apparel sector as a whole. So there is a lot of interest, certainly from companies, from her project member companies, as well as donors, multilaterals. So the ILO is quite involved and others. And there are a number of initiatives that have already begun or are under development right now, really looking at supporting the sustainable growth of the sector. In terms of what we really saw as some of the key needs, at a worker level, I think one key challenge that we saw for women is that it's really their first time in formal employment. So some of those basic skills, kind of communication, attendance, and understanding how to interact with the manager, these are really not in place yet. So we really see a need to kind of build up those skills, as well as the ability to take care of themselves on basic issues such as health and managing income. So we really saw some quite important needs and risks for women workers in the sector. I would also say on the kind of brand and supplier side that it's a new context. We see a lot of brands coming in and needing to take some time to set up their supply base, understand the context and culture. So I think for many actors, it's a quickly moving space, and we're still figuring out exactly what good practice looks like. So in the context of this quite dynamic space, her project has really identified a few key areas where we want to work, and this is where I'm getting to the pink box here. But we're seeking to complement and strengthen existing initiatives by providing workplace programs that are focusing on those issues that we know best and that we do best, focusing on general and reproductive health, communication skills building, and worker management relationships. So starting actually this month, we'll be working to set up operations in the garment sector. So we're identifying implementing partners right now, beginning program curriculum development, which will be adapted specifically to the context in the apparel sector. And we'll be inviting companies to enroll suppliers starting next year in about April. In the meantime, we're going to continue to engage with brand partners and other stakeholders to make sure that women's empowerment is really part of the agenda for the development of the sector. And to that end, I would just say to those on the call, we would really welcome follow-up conversations with you, understand your plans for Ethiopia, and how we can work with you. And I'll just also plug for the our scoping study launch will be in March 2017 in Addis for anyone who would like to join us. A bit about what we hope to achieve, and this is my last slide. We really want to see in the apparel sector active Her Project programs with tailored curricula looking at health and gender equality. We're looking to see brand partners with their suppliers making a strong commitment to workers' well-being with a particular focus on female workers. And we want to make sure that suppliers are capacitated to support the unique needs of the female workforce. Of course, at a women's individual level, we're looking to enable access to knowledge, resources, and skills for workers to take better care of themselves and fully benefit from their new status working in formal employment. And Her Project as a whole, we're looking to partner with brands, with government, with other stakeholders to support public dialogue and action for the responsible development of the sector. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to you, Marcus, and open up for questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Lauren. A very, very interesting presentation. I've got some few questions, but I'm not going to take up the audience's time with that necessarily. I'd like to open up for questions instead. So fire away, folks. Feel free to ask questions. Now's the opportunity. Let's have a look. I've got a couple of questions from coming in already. Is it possible for Her Project? Okay, here's somebody who's actually based in Cameroon, who's watching the taking part in the webinar today, who asks, says, interesting, impressive, and innovative project. Is it possible for Her Project to be replicated in Cameroon? And if so, what does it take for this project to be replicated? Are you looking at other countries in Africa to implement a sort of similar approach?
Yeah, no, thanks very much for the question. So in terms of our work in Africa to date, we're working Kenya and Ethiopia for the moment. We're certainly open to other conversations. I'm having a call a bit later about Mozambique. Ghana has come up on the radar. I would say, and so please follow up with me and I'm happy to have a conversation about it. I would say that for us, when we think about expansion to a new country, we really want to look first at sectors where there are a lot of women employed, of course. Second, because of our network with global buying companies, we typically look for sectors with a strong kind of export orientation. But happy to kind of follow up on that offline.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? While we're waiting for some more questions to come in, Lauren, I'd just like to ask, to what extent does child labour feature in your training of then young women? A lot of these will be mothers, and perhaps in the informal sector, which is, and also in the agricultural sector, appears to be an issue then in Ethiopia based on the report we wrote last year. Does that feature as an element of the education programs that you run?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So there are a couple points to make about that. So the first is that in the particular workplaces where we are providing interventions, so in pretty large plantation farms and looking forward in manufacturing, these are workplaces that are actually pretty advanced in terms of tracking and keeping out child labor. They're working with the type of global brands that that's just not going to be part of their supply chain. Of course, we're aware that it is a feature of the supply chain, certainly as you get to kind of smaller farms and domestic-oriented factories, for example. So I would say that we don't see it as an issue in most of the interventions that we are doing. And in terms of an interesting point is that the women that we're working with are typically not yet mothers. So they're young women, as young as 18 really. So our focus would be on kind of maternal and child health, looking forward when they do become mothers. But that's really the focus right now. But as we expand a bit more, it's certainly an issue that we're going to have to keep an eye on.
Excellent. Okay, thanks. Okay, there doesn't seem to be any other questions. So what I am going to do then is just basically say thank you very much, Lauren, and also to Pauline for your early presentation. We've got some really interesting presentations, very different information, helps provide sort of a much better, sort of broader understanding of what's going on in Ethiopia. And a reminder then also to those listening that you did plug your roundtable event in March, right, Lauren?
Yeah, I did.
Good. Excellent. I think you may, let's hope then that some people on the webinar, particularly those, we have a couple of members of the Ethical Trade Initiative in Norway, for example, who are in the textile sector, who are listening now. So it'd be great to reach out to them afterwards. I'll send out your presentation, both of you, Pauline and Lauren, afterwards, and then people can, of course, get in touch with you and discuss those kind of things further. Okay, so that basically wraps up for today. Thanks very much again to the speakers. Thanks everybody else for attending, for listening. And if you have any questions about the Local Resources Network, then please feel free to contact me after the webinar today. Okay, thanks very much everybody.